The most dangerous sound in the world is not an explosion, nor a scream, nor the rack of a slide. It is the click of a tubular lock falling into place when you are on the wrong side of the door. For Julian Vane, standing in the climate-controlled silence of the Sterling Hale vault, that click was the only thing standing between him and a life sentence. He didn't carry a weapon. He regarded them as crude tools for people who lacked imagination. Julian carried only a microfiber cloth, a chemist's pipette, and a replica of a 16th century manuscript so perfect it would have fooled the monk who wrote the original. He had exactly 4 minutes before the thermal sensors realized that the heat signature in the room was a human being and not a fluctuation in the fixed system. The object in question was the Codex Eterna. It wasn't made of gold or encrusted with jewels. It was a small, leather-bound book containing the only known handwritten schematics of a Renaissance inventor who rivaled Da Vinci. Its value was estimated at $40 million. But to the Sterling Hale Museum, it was the crown jewel of their Architecture of the Mind exhibit. Julian Vane was an acquisitional architect. He didn't steal. He rearranged ownership. He was a man of average height, average build, and a face so forgettable that witnesses often struggled to describe him 5 minutes after a conversation. This was his superpower. Eleanor Vance, the museum's head of security, was the opposite. Sharp-featured, meticulous, and possessing a memory like a steel trap. She viewed the museum not as a building, but as a living organism she was sworn to protect. She had spent $10 million upgrading the security system to the grid, a network of pressure plates, lasers, and biometric scanners that made the Louvre look like a convenience store. The plan relied on the one thing technology could not predict: bureaucratic incompetence. 3 weeks prior, Julian had hacked the museum's supply chain. He didn't touch the alarms or the cameras. Instead, he altered a shipping manifest for the museum's climate control maintenance. When the monthly shipment of nitrogen canisters used to preserve the documents arrived, one canister was marked with a slightly different serial number. Inside that canister was not nitrogen, but a high-density, rapid hardening polymer foam and a small, localized EMP device set on a timer. The museum was hosting the Gilded Age charity ball. Tuxedos, champagne, and enough perfume to mask the scent of nervous sweat. Julian walked through the front door, not as a thief, but as Arthur Peneligon, a mid-level donor from a logistics firm. He spent the first hour being seen. He shook and complimented Zalduvre in him. He wanted to be a known variable. A boring variable enjoying the exhibit Mr. Peneligon. Eleanor asked, her eyes scanning his lapels for hidden cameras. Immensely, Julian smiled, sipping sparkling water. Though I admit, the humidity in here plays havoc with my sinuses. We keep the humidity at strictly 45%, she replied dryly. Precision, Julian nodded. I admire that. He checked his watch 9:40 p.m. The maintenance cycle for the vault's climate control system was scheduled for 9:45 p.m. Julian excused himself to the restroom. Once inside the stall, he locked the door, removed his tuxedo jacket, and reversed it. The lining was matte black. He pulled thin, friction-grip gloves from his pocket. He climbed the toilet, popped the ceiling tile, and pulled himself into the plenum space above. Most thieves would try to cut the power. Julian knew that cutting the power triggered the backup generators and locked the facility down. He needed the system to think it was working perfectly. He crawled through the ducts, counting the vibrations of the fans. He reached the junction above the vault. Below him, the nitrogen canister he had planted was connected to the intake valve. The system engaged, the canister opened. Instead of nitrogen, the EMP device slid into the intake pipe. It didn't detonate a large blast. It emitted a low-frequency pulse designed to freeze the localized sensors inside the vault for exactly 6 minutes. Simultaneously, the polymer foam expanded into the pressure plate mechanism on the floor, locking the plates in their unweighted position. The computer would think the floor was empty even when Julian stepped on it. Julian dropped through the maintenance hatch dot. He landed silently. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the display cases. He approached the central podium. The codex editor sat under a polycarbonate dome. This was the hardest part. The dome was vacuum sealed. If he broke the seal, the pressure drop would trigger a silent alarm that bypassed the local sensors and went straight to the police. Julian produced the pipette. It was filled with a corrosive acid derived from HF20, designed to eat through polycarbonate without shattering it. He applied a perfect circle of droplets around the base of the dome, right where the locking mechanism sat. He waited not 10 seconds. 20, the plastic hissed quietly, turning to gel. With the steady hands of a surgeon, Julian lifted the dome. No alarm. The pressure equalization was slow enough that the sensors, already groggy from the EMP interference, didn't register the drop. He reached in and lifted the codex. It was heavier than he expected. History always is. He opened his jacket and placed the codex into a specially designed pouch against his ribs. In its place, he set the replica. He had spent 6 months aging the paper, ensuring the ink composition was chemically identical to the 16th century original. He lowered the dome. He applied a quick-drying sealant to the melted base. To the naked eye, it was flawless. Julian checked his watch. 9:49 p.m. He had 2 minutes left. He turned to the maintenance hatch to climb out and stopped. The hatch was closed. It wasn't just closed. The electronic lock on it had engaged. The EMP pulse had been slightly too strong, causing the system to reboot early. The fail-safe mode had kicked in, sealing all exits. Julian was trapped inside the vault. He looked at the thermal camera in the corner. The red light blinked. It was waking up. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. He looked around the room. There was no way out without an access card, and he didn't have one. If he was found here, it was over. He looked at the nitrogen intake valve, the one he had used to insert the EMP. It was too small for a human to fit through. But the floor vents recycled the air. They were bolted down. Julian knelt, pulling a high-torque screwdriver from his belt. He worked frantically. 1 bolt. 2 bolts. The thermal camera's light turned steady green. It was active. Julian threw his body flat against the floor, rolling under the display table of a 17th century tapestry. The table was lead-lined to protect the fabric from radiation. It would hide his heat signature. He lay in the dark under the table, breathing through his nose. The vault door hissed out. The massive steel door swung open. Eleanor Vane stood there, flanked by 2 guards. "Sensor glitch in Sector 4, she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. The humidity spike triggered a reboot. She walked into the room. Julian could see her shoes sensible, rubber-soled Oxford spacing the floor. She stopped directly in front of the CODEX. Julian held his breath. His heart hammered against the stolen book in his jacket. Eleanor leaned in, inspecting the dome. She squinted at the base where Julian had applied the sealant. "Looks clear," a guard said. "Probably just the storm drain backing up outside affecting the sensors." Eleanor didn't answer. She tapped the glass. She looked at the book. The replica was perfect. "The lighting looks off," she murmured. She turned and scanned the room. Her eyes swept over the tapestry table. "Check the vents," she ordered. The guards moved to the wall vents. They didn't check the floor vents where Julian had removed the bolts. "Vents are clear, ma'am." Eleanor stood still for a long moment. She was sensing something, that instinct that made her the best. But she had no proof. No broken glass. No tripped alarm. The book was there. "Reset the system," she commanded. "And double the guard on the door tonight. I don't like glitches." They turned and walked out. The vault door began to close. This was his only chance. As the heavy steel door swung shut, there is a dead zone, a 3-second window where the sensors blind themselves to prevent triggering an alarm on the closing door itself. Julian rolled out from under the table. He slid sideways through the narrowing gap of the door. The steel brushed his coat buttons. He tumbled into the hallway, rolling into the shadows behind a marble bust of Apollo just as the vault sealed with a definitive thud. 10 minutes later, Arthur Penelagon re-emerged from the restroom. He looked slightly pale. He found Eleanor Vance near the coat check. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Penelagon?" she asked. She looked tired. "Afraid so," Julian said, offering a sheepish smile. "Whatever was in those crab cakes didn't agree with me. I think I need some fresh air." Eleanor studied him. She looked at his hand steady, his eyes calm, and his jacket flat. The book was thin enough to be invisible. "I hope you feel better," she said. "Thank you. You run a tight ship, Miss Vance. I feel safer just standing here." "That's the job," she said. Julian walked out into the cool night air. The valet brought his car. He tipped the man $50, slid into the leather seat, and didn't exhale until he was 3 blocks away. The next morning, the Codex Eterna was still on display. Visitors marveled at it. Students sketched it. It would be 3 years before a visiting scholar from Vienna would notice that the ink on page 42 faded slightly differently under UV light than it should have. By then, the insurance claim would be moot. The trail would be cold, and Julian Vane would be retired on a vineyard in the south of France. Julian sat on his balcony miles away, pouring a glass of cheap wine. He opened the true codex. He didn't intend to sell it. He didn't want the money. He turned the page, studying the intricate drawing of a flying machine that never flew. He traced the lines with his finger. "Beautiful," he whispered to the empty room. He had committed the perfect crime not for greed, but for the privacy of owning a secret that the rest of the world believed they still held.